You're live.
Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you are located, possibly even good evening. I just want to begin by acknowledging that I am here situated at the University of Waterloo, which is located on the territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. And just like you, to take a moment to reflect on the land or the location that you are situated. This is very exciting for me to be moderating the panel discussion today. We have three wonderful presentations prepared. We are, or you are, attending the challenge area, Autonomy and Independence. As you know, AgeWell has 8 challenge areas that are featured during this week-long EPIC conference. This conference is running for 10 days from May 30th to June 10th, and today is June 1st. And these challenge area presentations are taking place on Crowdcast from 1 to 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time on Monday to Thursday of this week and next week. On Friday, this Friday, June the 3rd, please do join us for Making Connections, an EPIC networking event with Jennifer Polk from PhD to Life, followed by an APPTA hosted workshop called Bridging the Gap, Engaging in the Policy Space as a Health Researcher. I encourage you to check out the AgeWell EPIC conference webpage for additional details and for registration information. And just a few housekeeping comments here. Today's session comprises of 3 presentations, as I mentioned, with a 5-minute question and answer following each. And we're going to conclude with a longer general question and answer period that aims to place the presentations in a larger discourse and address potential research impact. All attendees are encouraged to use the Ask a Question box to post your questions and to leave a comment on a question. You can also upvote the questions that others have submitted, and that gives me, the moderator, an opportunity to see which are popular questions and should have priority for discussion. The session is being recorded and will be available for playback, and the links for the playback will be on Crowdcast and on EPIC conference site. So before I begin introducing the presenters, I should probably take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Lili Liu, and I am Dean of the Faculty of Health and Professor in the School of Public Health Sciences here at the University of Waterloo. What I think I will do, well, I'll just mention the presenters, but maybe I'll take a little bit more time before each presentation to present their bios, so that you're not having to retain all that information. As I age, I'm recognizing working memory is easily taxed. So it's the presenters today for each of the presentations. The first one we're going to have presenting is Adebusola, or we call her Busola, Adekoya from the University of Waterloo. She's a PhD student. This is going to be followed by presentation 2, which will be co-presented by Carlee and Ian. And Carlee MacNeill is from Dalhousie University, and Ian Goldman is from the SMARTech project. And I want to just make a plug for our stakeholders, and Ian is certainly one of those. That is something that we're doing this year in the EPIC presentations, is to bring in stakeholders from all areas into these presentations to co-present. And our third presentation is going to be delivered by Violet Ignace from the University of British Columbia. So it's my great pleasure now to introduce our first speaker. Busola Adekoya is a registered nurse and a PhD candidate in the School of Public Health Sciences at the University of Waterloo. She's also supervised by yours truly, and Grace gives me great pleasure as well as honor to introduce her. Her current research focuses on persons living with dementia at risk of going missing, and how policies and programs for alert systems are developed and implemented in Canada and in Scotland. Busola is also the Vice President of the Age Well HQP Advisory Committee. Take it away, Busola.
Thank you so much, Lili. Sorry, it's just taking me longer to get things sorted here. Bear with me, please. Can everybody see my slide?
Yes, looks great.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. Just like Lili said, my name is Busola Adekoya. I'm a PhD candidate in the School of Public Health Sciences at the University of Waterloo. Today, I'll be presenting on Locator technology and the human rights of people living with dementia. A little bit of background information. So Locator devices that use Global Positioning System, or GPS, are technologies that help locate a missing person with dementia quickly by alerting care partners and healthcare professionals when the person leaves a designated area and providing the geographic location of the person. Locator devices not only enhance the safety and independence of people living with dementia, but can provide them with the opportunity to continue to enjoy and participate in activities that are important to them. And these devices can also provide peace of mind to care partners as well as healthcare professionals. However, there have been questions about the human rights implications of using Locator technology. For example, does the use of Locator technology respect the human rights of people living with dementia? So what we see, as we are aware, what human rights are, these are rights that are inherent to all humans, irrespective of who they are, their age, their sex, and even their disabilities. And these rights include rights to life, right to health, right to dignity, right to privacy, and autonomy, including freedom of choice. So what is the gap in the literature? We are seeing that there is little analysis done using a human rights framework, such as the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which I will discuss further in the next slide. So like I mentioned earlier, an example of a human rights framework is the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. This convention was adopted in 2006 with the aim of promoting the human rights of people with disabilities. And these rights, the convention kind of focuses on, it contains protocols actually that helps to, that provides information about how rights can apply to persons with disabilities and ways in which these rights are promoted or violated. So now to my objective. The objective of my study was to understand how the use of Locator technology supports the human rights of people living with dementia as articulated in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. To my methods. So I completed a review of both academic and gray literature, as well as the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, using databases such as Cinahl, Scopus, and Google, and I analyzed them for key themes. To my findings, 3 key themes were identified based on my analysis. The first key theme is right to autonomy. According to Article 3 of the Convention, persons living with dementia, they shall have right to autonomy. And autonomy signifies independence and freedom to make one's own choices. It's really interesting to say in the literature that the use of GPS can promote as well as undermine one's autonomy. And capacity plays a key role when it comes to how do we support the autonomy of people living with dementia. So capacity to give informed consent, which can be written, or assent, which is a verbal declaration of one's approval. It's really complex. When you think of it, persons living with dementia, their cognitive abilities fluctuate daily. and they may need more time to respond to information or to be able to process information that is being presented to them. So it's not like a very simple thing to say, oh, did they have the capacity to provide consent at a particular time, just as we see whenever decision making is being made regarding Locator technology. Another point is that if persons living with dementia, if they receive appropriate support, they'll be able to make the decision. So I mentioned earlier that they may require time, they may need some time to process information. So if they require appropriate support, for example, providing the information in a simple language in an appropriate format, they will be able to make decision. And considering the environment, so if there is too much background noise, that can be distracting and make it hard for persons living with dementia to be able to make a decision. One way that the use of GPS can undermine one's autonomy is if they are not aware of the use of a GPS device. You know, it's really interesting what I saw in the literature that care partners may have more control than people living with dementia. And this is often based on the assumption that people living with dementia, they may not understand the benefits of using GPS or even the information being provided to them. Now to my second key thing. Rights to privacy, dignity, and liberty. According to Articles 1, 18, and 22 of the Convention, persons with disabilities, they have the right to liberty of movement and dignity and not being subjected to unlawful interference with their privacy. But what we see here is that the use of GPS device can actually be a safety net for people living with dementia. So it can also promote their right to liberty of movement which means that they have the opportunity to go wherever they want and have to worry less about going missing, or if they go missing, they will be found quickly. The use of GPS devices can also violate privacy rights if they are being tracked or if they go missing by choice. And the use of what I saw in the literature, very interesting, is that personal information can be shared with a third party, and sometimes people are not even aware of the information that is being shared. And it is generally assumed that people waive their rights to privacy when they subscribe to using Locator technology. And if you notice on the slide there, I put tracked in quotation marks. This is because the use of the term tracked, as well as the act of tracking people, can be perceived as stigmatizing, because it has negative connotations attached to it for being used by police services or law enforcement to monitor criminals or prisoners. And also, the use of Locator or GPS devices can be perceived as a sign of frailty. My third key theme is accessibility and affordability. According to Articles 9 and 20 of the Convention, persons with disabilities shall have access to technologies at affordable cost to live independently and participate in all aspects of life. So what do we see in the literature regarding the use of GPS devices? Access to GPS devices is not universal or equal. In fact, cost is a barrier, especially for low-income older adults. I was looking at what are the costs of GPS devices, and it can be as low as $20 and it can be as high as over $400. So, and they have to pay subscription fee as well as monthly fees sometimes. And so think of low-income older adults. How do you be able to sustain, not only afford buying the GPS devices, but also sustaining? It's really important. Another thing that I found in the literature is that there is lack of familiarization with the technology. Not all older adults know how to use technology. And lack of access creates health inequalities and exacerbates vulnerabilities. So based on my findings, I have 4 recommendations for practice, policy, and research. My first recommendation is to involve and support people living with dementia in decision-making. So it is really important that care partners and health professionals adapt the decision-making process to the needs of people living with dementia. For example, providing information in the most appropriate and simple form. Consideration should also be given to the physical environment where decisions take place, such as providing a quiet place to minimize interruptions and providing more time to reflect on information before they make decisions. And they should be able to revise their decisions at any time. Decisions about the use of Locator technology can also be included in advanced directives or advanced care planning to promote the person's autonomy. My second recommendation is for policymakers and governments at all levels to augment the development of Locator technology through grants or subsidies so that people living with dementia will have access to affordable technologies and participate in all aspects of life. My third recommendation is to adopt legal measures to address concerns related to data sharing and privacy. So when subscribing to Locator technology, it is important that information about privacy rights is given in a simple language and format that people living with dementia will understand. Also, what personal information is being shared with a third party, and what exactly does it mean to waive one's privacy rights? And my last recommendation is for researchers and technology designers to co-design Locator technology with people living with dementia and their care partners, as well as provide training and support. Locator technology needs to be designed in a way that respects the rights of people living with dementia by learning what it means from their perspectives to respect their human rights and how the use of GPS devices might be perceived as stigmatizing. This is my contact information, and I would like to thank Hagewell for this opportunity. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Busola, for your wonderful presentation. And I think we have 5 minutes now for Q&A. So if anyone would like to post a question on the Ask a Question feature of this platform. Okay, we have a question here. Have you encountered any promising interventions or policies to support engagement of persons with dementia in decisions about GPS?
That's a great question. I know, so as you've already heard, Lili's PhD candidate, and I know that our research work focuses on policies as well as programs to support people living with dementia. So we have the opportunity to collaborate not only with persons living with dementia, but also to look with policymakers. So yes, I'm part of Lili's research team, and we have the opportunity, we have lots of ongoing studies right now that we're looking at how do we support persons living with dementia and collaborate with them as well as policymakers. I hope I answered your questions. Sorry.
Thank you for that response. And certainly, you know, if people would like to have a follow-up question for clarification or a different question, feel free to pose it in the chat. Yes, thank you. You did respond to that question.
Thank you.
Lili, there are more questions in the Ask a Question box at the bottom there. There's 3.
Oh, I see. Okay, I apologize. I was waiting for the, okay, very good. So, so here's a question, the next question. How common is the use of human rights framework in age-tech research? Is it gaining traction, or is it still considered a more radical approach?
I think it's gaining more attention right now from the few articles that I was able to review. And like I mentioned, it's still a gap in the literature, the use of human rights, especially the United Convention. But I think people are now paying more attention to it. That's when we design technologies such as GPS, we are not just only looking at how the benefits of it, but we are looking at how does it respect and support human rights. So I think it's gaining more attention, but we still have more work to do in that area.
Yes, for sure. So in your research, have you come across a lot of concerns about GPS as a surveillance technology and invasion of privacy?
Sorry, can you repeat that? Sorry, it's just a lot of background noise there.
Yeah. In the research that you've done to date, have you come across a lot of concerns about GPS technology being considered as a surveillance technology, or you know, something that it creates invasion of privacy?
Sorry, some yard work in my background. Yeah, so the question is, have I considered the GPS devices, right?
Have you come across a lot of concerns about it because of the surveillance nature and the invasion of privacy? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And there are lots of articles actually written about ethical and legal issues in the use of
Okay.
GPS devices. It's just that they are not focusing more on human rights. And I think there is some overlap when you look at what are some ethical and legal issues. Concerns, privacy is one of them, is a big one actually. And the autonomy that I talked about. And another one is dignity, how the use of GPS devices respect the dignity of people living with dementia. So yes, there are more articles and more work being done, but the focus is just not really on human rights.
Right, right. So you've encountered concerns also in the literature. I think we have
Yes.
time for one more question. It's a two-parter. So the first part of it is, have you worked with technology developers to share these recommendations? And then if yes, do you have any idea how this could be incorporated into policy or ethical findings?
Unfortunately, I have not, but I welcome opportunity to work with designers and app developers. I think it will be great. If anyone is interested, please contact me. But I'm always looking for opportunities to be able to share my own findings and to work with them, because I think it's really important that they hear the summary or the evidence from the literature so that they can incorporate that in their design.
Yes, those are great questions to guide the continued work that you are doing. So thank you to the audience for posing those excellent questions. If the next two presenters are ready, we'll move on then to Carlee and Ian. I'll just invite them to the screen, and they will present their 10-minute presentation. But before they do that, I'd like to take a few moments to just provide some background and read their bio to you. So Carlee MacNeill is a master's student in the Department of Community Health and Epidemiology at Dalhousie University in Halifax, Nova Scotia, one of my favorite provinces. Her research interests relate to health services and healthy aging. She is a research assistant in her department, and she works at a not-for-profit organization providing person-centered support to adults aging with intellectual disabilities in her community. Carlee is an advocate for health equity and volunteers as a yoga instructor for low-income older adults living in her community. Joining her today in this presentation is Ian Goldman. Until 2010, Ian worked with teams on information technology projects for various organizations. He collaborated with several departments to evaluate and deploy software for process improvement. He then began working in senior centers, showing clients how to use software and apps to stay connected with family and pursue interests. Ian, quote, distance managed care for his mom for her 8-year journey through dementia, sharing his learnings through Alzheimer's Society, Toronto. During 2016, he has provided lived experience to several innovation projects for technology and aging and enabling digital literacy through AgeWell and CABI. Ian holds a natural sciences for chemical engineering degree from Cambridge University. So welcome, Carlee and Ian. Look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to get my screen sharing set up. Can everyone see this okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So hi everyone. Welcome to our presentation about an AgeWell funded core research project. The title of our presentation is Lessons Learned Implementing SMARTech for Older Adults to Live More in Continuing Care. With me today as my co-presenter is a member of our project, Ian Goldman, and together we'll be presenting on behalf of Dr. Susan Kirkland and the rest of the SMARTech team.
Our project timeline is 3 years, starting in April 2020 and ending this coming March 23. Therefore, the lessons we're going to share with you today are interim as the project is ongoing. So SMART. SMART stands for self-monitoring, analysis, and reporting technologies. So key features of these technologies are that they connect to the internet, they use artificial intelligence, and perhaps most important, they can be customized to users' particular needs. It's recognized that smart technologies have enormous potential to promote healthy aging of older adults in continuing care settings. However, these are often excluded from digital solutions like these.
Researchers, developers, and funders tend to assume that this population of older adults would not benefit from or lacks interest and capacity to use these technologies, and they are primarily focused on community dwellers aging in place. Our goal is to address this gap by supporting the adoption of SMARTech in continuing care settings to improve the independence and well-being of older adults. Our technology solution includes the Google Nest Hub Max and proprietary technology that allows users to voice activate devices in their rooms. To carry out our aim, we have 3 specific research objectives. So the first is to understand the lived experiences, needs, and desires for independence and autonomy and well-being among older adults with complex conditions in continuing care. The second is to determine the feasibility and effectiveness of implementing an off-the-shelf smart solution to address well-being in a way that is individually customized, supported, and sustainable. And our third goal is to explore how to best incorporate sustainable, person-centered technology solutions into continuing care settings that result in scalable outcomes. So this includes adoption into organizational policies, procedures, programs, and care planning. I'd like to take a moment to touch on our research approach. So firstly, we're using mixed methodology, and our mixed methods approach helps ensure that our quantifiable findings are grounded in participants' experiences and perceptions. We are also using a person-centered approach, having the direct input of older adults and caregivers throughout all aspects of the project ensures that project outputs reflect their needs and priorities. And thirdly, our approach is transdisciplinary. Our project requires expertise from multiple disciplines and integrates actors from different levels, including technology professionals, continuing care providers, healthcare researchers, and older adults and caregivers. This approach enables strong communication, shared commitment to objectives, and effective and timely troubleshooting. In terms of our project setting and actors involved, so Northwood is our community research partner. They are the largest not-for-profit continuing care home in Nova Scotia, and we have a unique collaboration setup that allows us to co-learn and co-develop in real time. Researchers collect data on site with the support of Northwood staff, who also contribute to data analysis and knowledge exchange during our research meetings.
The diagram on the right, showing the actors, reflects the many disciplines and levels of the team implementing this project. We see at the very center the older adult participants, and they are surrounded by staff and unpaid caregivers. Beyond that, in blue, is a group called the Rehabilitation Support Team, who we will be explaining have become a very important lesson that we've learned about. As we move away from the center, we see on the outside the researchers gathering information and reporting to the outside world.
So our first lesson learned is that the research population is much more diverse than one might expect. There is much diversity in terms of age, time spent living in continuing care, and in the complexity of health and social care needs. Yet, we learned that most of this population wants to learn how to use SMARTech to increase their independence and autonomy. 6 months after receiving the technology, some residents are already reporting that it is improving their independence and quality of life. For example, one participant who used the voice-activated technology said, "I think it's boosted my self-confidence. I believe my attitude has changed. I'm just more excited about the fact that I can do things on my own. I'm self-reliant, more so than I was probably 2 years ago." Our second lesson learned so far is that it is not enough to provide the technology without also providing ongoing personalized support for using it. Older adults in continuing care tend to have less access to warm experts, such as family or friends, who support tech adoption and its ongoing use. What sets our project apart is that we intentionally implemented a rehabilitation team to fill the support gap. This team is comprised of an OT and 2 assistants whose personalized support has been crucial for successful and sustainable uptake of the technology by our participants. We now understand how crucial this support is, and there is a need to explore how we can increase it. For example, one participant stated, "I find it annoying when it goes off and I can't call anybody. I don't know how to turn it back on, and sometimes the rehab assistant would be gone for the day." The final lesson we'll share relates to the challenges we have faced so far to the scalability of our solution. First, because the quality of IT infrastructure was inadequate to support individual use of smart technologies and needed to be upgraded at Northwood. So for example, Northwood had to install individual routers in residents' rooms to increase Wi-Fi signals. However, there are no incentives or funding mechanisms to support this in most continuing care homes. There are also significant costs associated with continuing to adapt to evolving IT infrastructure. Therefore, government or other types of support will be needed to maintain and scale our solution across Nova Scotia.
Now, our team has identified a lack of policy and standards to guide Canadian continuing care facilities who are interested in implementing our solution or similar types of smart technologies for residents. This impedes the scalability of integrating smart solutions across continuing care settings. We'd like to conclude by presenting some implications of our lessons learned to date. As we've shown, this project is working to demonstrate that smart solutions can help enable a dignified and autonomous life for adults living with disabilities and complex conditions.
Most existing research focuses on how older adults aging at home can support their health through smart technology. But what about when their home is a continuing care facility? By neglecting to consider this population that is often also aging with disabilities and has increased support needs, we risk further excluding already digitally marginalized older adults. Our research shows that this subpopulation is interested in this technology and they can successfully use it if the appropriate supports are in place. We invite you all to consider these lessons learned in your own future work. Thank you very much for your time and attention and this opportunity to present. I just need to figure out how to stop sharing.
I think you've successfully stopped sharing. Thank you so much, Ian and Carlee, for a presentation that really speaks to my work and resonates. I see a lot of familiarity with some of the findings that we have. So I'm just going to now access and see if there are any questions from our audience. I certainly have some I can hold until the final conversation or discussion. Take a pause for people to, maybe I'll just say right now as we're waiting for the questions to come in that in some of the work that we've done, your recommendations or your findings really fall under this category of facilitating conditions, right? And the facilitating conditions could relate to human support, which is what you try to do with your rehab staff and personnel, as well as infrastructure funding. And you're absolutely right. All things are pointing towards policies, and there's much work that we need to do with regard to policies, not just in continuing care, but also in the general community. So I'm going to just...
There are some questions in the Ask a Question box, Lili.
Okay, thank you. All right, so here we go. So here's the first question, relates to whether, can you speak to the diversity of older adults and caregiver stakeholders involved in your project? So this is related to your lesson 1. How generalizable are your findings to other care homes in Vancouver or Toronto, for example?
So in terms of the diversity of older adults, one inclusion criteria for our research was that individuals have a physical disability that impedes their ability to use typical technology solutions.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the key criteria for targeting participants. So everyone that is participating has some form of complex physical disability, but not a cognitive impairment for reasons related to consent and learning to use the technology. So that is something that needs to be explored further. So our findings would not be generalizable necessarily to the entirety of anyone in continuing care. In terms of caregiver diversity, we include caregivers at different levels. So care staff, the OTs, also administrative staff, and then management at Northwood to capture these different perspectives. And then I will also mention that our project is also extended into home care, older adults receiving home care. And so in that area of the project that we didn't have time to cover today, but unpaid caregivers are involved in that side as well.
Okay.
Ian, is there anything you'd like to add to that? Or
just on the informal or unpaid caregivers, one of our actions at the moment is to produce a newsletter for that group so that they see what benefits many of the residents are receiving and decide if perhaps some of those benefits will be of interest to their particular loved one.
Very good. Yeah, thank you for that response. Can you expand on the rehab team that provided support, the OTs and the assistants? Were they already part of the staff or were they new hires? And as a follow-up, why OT? Was it because they were available?
so what is special, I suppose, about the rehab team is that they're hired to specifically work in supporting the use of technology. So I know the head OT of the rehab team was already a staff member, and I believe the other two were as well. It's another OT and a physiotherapy, but that I would have to confirm or can get back to someone about that. But they are, in terms of the role in rehab team, were specifically hired for that because it seems to be that caregivers often have a lot of responsibilities. And so we didn't want to add something that's an extra task for other caregivers. And in terms of OT, I think that fits well because that has to do a lot with helping with adopting new behaviors or, learning to do things in new ways. And so in that sense, an occupational therapist was a good fit because they have the skills and knowledge to help people to adapt to living daily life in new ways and to adopt new tools.
Very good. And I think we have time for one last question. this relates to the pandemic, and I know it's quite obvious that the technologies that you presented are assisting with social connections. Specific though, in any research or any tie to the effects of keeping seniors connected during the pandemic in the infection lockdowns and related to your technologies?
So these technologies, we can all, I think, understand how important they are during those times of isolation and restriction. For us, we implemented the technologies as restrictions were easing. So it's difficult for me to speak to that because we did do a pilot study. So I do believe maybe some participants or some older adults did have at least some part of the tech intervention, but because so many changes needed to be made to IT infrastructure, it really, the pandemic put a hold on things. But if, there was another wave or another lockdown, luckily now older adults would have the technology. But unfortunately can't necessarily discuss our findings in relation to restrictions or past restrictions, if that makes sense. I hope that answered the question.
I think it does. And there's been several other questions that have come in, but what we're going to do is hold on to those questions for the larger discussion. So, just hang tight, and what we'll do is invite Violet to provide her presentation, and then we'll circle back to some of these additional questions. Is that all right? Okay. Thank you both, Carlee and Ian, for a wonderful presentation. And now what I'd like to do is call Violet Ignace to the screen and prepared to provide her 10-minute presentation. I'll just give, by way of an introduction, a brief bio. Violet Ignace is completing her first year of Master's in Nursing Science degree at UBC Okanagan. Violet currently lives on unceded Sialkit territory in the South Okanagan in BC. And since 2018, Violet's worked alongside UBC's Cultural Safety and Health Promotion Lab. Violet is passionate about health equity and improving health outcomes for marginalized people. Go ahead, Violet.
Hello. Hi, everyone. So I'll just ask Allison to pull up my slideshow.
Yes, they should be there. Do you see them?
Okay, now I see them. Awesome. So as the title says, co-creating digital spaces to share Indigenous elders and knowledge keepers stories. So just want to take note to even like the wording around it with the apostrophes, just showing that their stories and what they share always belongs to them. It's not something that can be taken from them. And I just wanted to give light to the people who've contributed to this study and the funding for it. Next slide, please. So embedded throughout my presentation will be different pictures of the unceded territory where I work, play, and live. And this is Syilx or Skillook people's land. And I just wanted to acknowledge that stories have happened here since time began, and stories will continue to happen here. And stories can be very foundational to how people live and what matters to them. And as an Indigenous woman myself, my philosophy really revolves around like supporting improved outcomes for Indigenous people with a focus on incorporating traditional knowledge systems, as those have often been left out of main research work. And I'm just honored to take part in research that allows me to learn from elders and the experiences they possess. Next slide, please. So I just have like a bit of a background, which just speaks to Indigenous elders and how they're teachers beyond their communities, and they offer teachings, life experience from all walks of life, and have existed in cultures that have very well-established technologies that have allowed them to innovate over a long-standing period of time. And there's mutual benefit when these technologies and when their stories are gifted to people who are willing to listen. And then just on starting this research work and just really taking note about how Western systems and Western healthcare systems don't always prioritize Indigenous knowledge in Western systems, and where how these views would really help to work towards ideas of holistic wellness and the new things that are coming up in research the last 10, 20 years or so, which really advocate for patient-centered research or community-focused research, and that these ways have always been a part of Indigenous histories. So aiming to create culturally safe ways for elders to share, and then really the key focus is definitely cultural safety because of how these have historically been denied and continually in different ways. And yeah, so next slide, please. So this is this is one of the main methodologies that are used in this study, where it's coined by a Mi'kmaq elder, Albert Marshall, which says to see from one eye the strength of Indigenous ways of knowing and the other eye from Western ways of knowing, and then combining both eyes for the good of all. So this really helps to see the positives and strengths of either side of research and how they can benefit people and how we can be within different systems of research and still work towards honoring knowledge and valuing what communities have to offer. And Indigenous methodology focus is really not giving a synonymous approach to working with Indigenous peoples, instead working towards how to co-develop, how to facilitate practices that are grounded in community person-specific needs instead of an overarching approach. Next slide, please. So learning from elders and the wisdom they share is really that privilege of maintaining those reciprocal relationships, and a major focus of this project and moving forward is going to be how to build partnerships and support technology, digital spaces for elders based on their needs and priorities. So even the initial questions that are mainly outlined are questions that are very open-ended to which stories would you like to share with others, and what kind of stories would you like to share, and how would you like these to be given and gifted, and for how long, so to speak. Next slide, please. So first, with a review of the literature with the Medline and Cinahl databases to identify the impacts of Indigenous elders in relation to sharing their stories. So oftentimes, if these stories are painful or different issues surrounding the telling of that, how to make it as safe of a space as possible, and see if there are positive impacts towards sharing their stories. So how to facilitate respectful conversations and so on. And a lot of the things that the research was and different past elder groups and elder circles and collective ways of working with elders have really highlighted things that have been surprising in different ways. For example, one of them was talking about how when there's a posted digital media, that there really should be ongoing consultation over the years, and that something shouldn't just be posted indefinitely, which once I read that, I thought, oh, of course that makes sense, but it wasn't something I would have initially thought of. And elders really shared the benefit of sharing their stories because they wanted to give knowledge to future generations, and they found and some elders found their stories as an act of resistance, which contributed to their wellness, and noticed how it does take courage to share their stories at time and navigating grief, although there really is that perseverance. And they enjoyed guiding, forming connections with others, and promoting a sense of community when people were listening to them and engaging on and out. And an important thing that the literature offered was there's a need for those leadership roles, and then ongoingly what it means to co-develop with a person or with people is to really give that space to create and say that, oh, I would actually like to share this, or this might not seem like the right time, but I'm willing to give this. So really creating that openness and informal conversations without set objectives, that relaxed environment, and just inquiring about protocol that's specific for that area to make someone feel comfortable. And the different research that I've done has outlined some of the processes for that, but really it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Next slide, please. And then, yeah, I just wanted to end my presentation with sharing that over centuries, oral storytelling and traditional knowledge, which can also be KT kind of knowledge, is part of truth telling, connecting to a person's ancestors, the histories, lessons learned, and successes, and healing can occur from these actions. To really take time in a society that is not often centered around older adults and really values youth and that kind of attitude, to really like transfer and think about like our biases and what we value of language, tradition, stories, and how to create ways to increase meaningful relationships. Next slide, please. So I just leave you with how can you, within the work you're a part of, facilitate culturally safe engagement? How can we work towards collectively thinking about data sovereignty and how to keep ongoing consent as one of our priorities? Next slide, please. I think it's just my references. Yes, thank you so much for this opportunity to present.
What a fascinating presentation. Thank you so much, Violet. I can see there are intersections. For example, how you've finished your presentation talking about data sovereignty, which is particularly important for Indigenous populations, but also ongoing consent, which circles back to Busola's presentation around consent and assent. So actually, the first question here that's being posed by the audience is kind of reflecting back the question you are asking of the audience, which is, what can you share, or can you share any information about the kinds of, sorry, that's not it. Can you speak on how Western, or suggest how Western researchers can best engage with Indigenous partners to incorporate two-eyed seeing in the work that they do?
So I think it would be along the lines of really like having like a process that outlines like what you want to do, like what you want to achieve and your goals within that, and centering it around what the research can offer the individual. So with a two-eyed seeing approach, a lot of the questions really give that kind of energy back to what the community or what the elder would like to offer, and just recognizing really how the histories really play into all of that role with being able to like provide like that access and ownership and increase those ways. And even within a few of like the policy recommendations I've been working on, they've really centered around even providing resources that can help to see that information in a new way. And since I've over like the last 10 years or so, there's been an increase in sharing more perspectives, and especially coming out of the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action in 2012. These have been really an embedded part of different projects and different research initiatives. And to really keep seeing that information, having it change in different ways, whether it's Indigenous specific or even towards Indigenous systems that recognize that older people, younger people, people of all types of life have always been like valued. And yeah, I think that's probably all I have to say about that. There's just so there's like so much for really valuing like local knowledge. And
Yeah. Would you, so here in the Faculty of Health, as of February, we've brought on an Indigenous elder who is with a title of Knowledge Keeper, and on reflection, we can't imagine how we even try to indigenize or address truth and reconciliation recommendations without having Indigenous, members as part of our staff and faculty. And so would you recommend that those with a Western perspective would need to incorporate or invite Indigenous ways of knowing, and people who are Indigenous to actually, with lived experience, to be part of the research endeavor? Would you think that that would be a really important strategy?
I think it would be a very important strategy as long as it's as long as it takes place in a really thoughtful way. And there's been even just like in the information that I've found where it can talk about there's a really good one. I just have to think about it for 1 second. Where even, for example, the research outlines and a few different articles have said to never ask an elder how much they want to receive for an honorarium or for payment, because that can be seen as really disrespectful when you're asking someone, okay, share this sacred knowledge. I'm going to trade it for a transaction and give that meaning to it. So I really recommend, like, when working with elders, it really has to come from an approach to, yeah, still like honor the histories, and then ongoingly how we contribute to unsafe practices at times, and how to just re-engage with not knowing things, trying to do the work, to some of that groundwork to figure it out, and just kind of the cultural humility really comes in, and the unlearning and learning again.
Yeah, and a safe environment for people to learn who are non-Indigenous also to learn is also, I would think, an important factor. We have a question here, Violet, for you, specific to data sovereignty. So this audience member is asking, what do you mean by that?
So data sovereignty, it really data sovereignty. I don't, not actually sure how to say it. I just kind of always go with it.
Both are fine.
It kind of goes with who gets ownership of that knowledge. How long is that knowledge out there? And when you look at Indigenous peoples and different nations who've had their information in different research settings exploited, targeted, eradicated, data sovereignty really becomes a foundation of how do you give back that information and how do you allow the people providing that information to have more control over it. And if you're looking for more information on that light, I would really suggest maybe maybe I shouldn't be suggesting things, but there's an OCAP training that's like available online, and I found it really thoughtful, and they provided different research examples of how different nations have had a lot of like issues with research and how to then center around providing that back.
Thank you. Yes, it is a big topic, and thank you to the audience member for bringing that up, because that is a very, very, very good question. I think we have time for one more question before we bring back the other three presenters and have a larger conversation. The last question I'd like to pose on behalf of the audience is a question about whether or not you can share information about the kinds of stories that are shared or digitized in your project, and are they available publicly?
In the next little while, through working with the project, I'm gonna start kind of asking those questions and how elders would like to have their stories shared, and we're just gonna kind of see how that goes, because some may, when the research is proposed for them to decide what they would like to do with their stories, some would like a story or knowledge or teaching to be widely shared with others, and some would like it maybe for family, with only different family to have certain access to it, or some would just want that material for themselves for someone to open up in a few years, or some would only like it on say a website with direct kind of criteria and re-engagement of how long, why, how, what does that kind of look like for you? But that's still like really like ongoing kind of, yeah.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. So I hope that those short 5-minute time spans for quick questioning of each of the presenters is enough to whet the audience's appetite. And I'd like to now invite back the other three presenters. So if Busola, Carlee, and Ian can join Violet on the screen, we can open this up for conversation or discussion. Okay, and I believe there are some questions that have been carried over as well from before. So I'll try to see if I can make some sense of that. Okay. So yes, just a reminder to audience members, you can post your questions and direct them to any of the panelists or to multiple panelists, or just post a question. So maybe we can, this is a question that I had as well, go back to the second presentation by Carlee and Ian. Here's a question specific to, well, this individual is asking if you could give some examples as to how older adults use smart technology in their daily activities. So I think I'm very curious about that as well.
So, okay, I just had to check my mic was on. So with our technology set up, with what participants have, what seems to be popular is using the technology to make voice and video calls, to turn their lights on and off, to turn a TV on and off, operate fans. There are a couple using bed controllers, so being able to adjust the height and position of their bed so that they don't have to rely on caregivers to come in and physically adjust them, I know is huge for some participants. And then also more generally playing music, entertainment, watching videos, playing games, surfing the internet.
Okay.
Lots of
All
different.
making them feel more autonomous, having control over their life and their environment.
Yes, so lots of it is around controlling, interacting with environment, with the environmental features of where they're living. And kind of related to that, what would be the role of a warm expert? Maybe explain what a warm expert is.
So a warm expert is typically a person that is a social connection already to an older adult, so typically a family member or friend. And this person is not a professional or not a technology professional, but there's someone that has enough digital literacy, enough understanding and experience using technology that they're able to support an older adult to get introduced to technology, to set it up, to help troubleshoot issues as they use them or as they arise, to answer questions. So it's really like this informal digital literacy educator and like informal tech support person.
Okay. And can this individual be, I'm just extrapolating on the question here, can this individual be anyone going forward, do you think, like a volunteer or a university student who comes to spend some volunteer time? Or do you see a job description that for a paid person to be doing this kind of a role?
Well, hopefully we'll see similar or see job descriptions or job positions come up for that, because I think that we're seeing that it's important. A lot of people need the support to actually integrate it and sustain this into their daily life. And this could also be people in community settings. It doesn't have to be someone in long-term care. And typically a warm expert is thought of as a family or friend member, but I don't see why it couldn't be, a volunteer or a neighbor. I think is also a common one. Just someone that's able to offer that support and I think importantly, maybe allow the person to be vulnerable and learning to use these things. But yeah,
Right.
I hope
Okay.
that answered the question.
Yeah, and there's a question that perhaps is a typical question posed to a warm expert, and that is, how would you even control the hospital bed with some of these technologies? Would it be through that voice activation device you're talking about? It's that sort of thing?
Yeah, so the way,
Okay.
or Ian, do you want to speak to it?
It is a combination of voice activation,
Okay.
actually driving a particular small motor, which can listen to the key words that are said, and they have to be keywords, so there are often posters on the wall saying, reminding the resident, this is how you tell the bed up 2 notches, down
Yeah,
2 notches.
I see. Good. So it's also training the user how to interact with the technology in a way. Okay. There's a question here that's also related to my recent experience in actually publishing the age-well book, Autonomy Independence, Aging in an Era of Technology, where we had a persona who was an Indigenous elder out in BC. And we went through, this is, so Violet's already nodding, this would be a question for you, Violet, where we interacted with other members of the community who would speak on his behalf. In this elder, we were interested in knowing how he used technology to continue to provide ceremonial services, and many elders were doing that during the pandemic, and he was very willing. We went through a consent phase where he would consent to this, and even having his picture drawn by an artist to include in the book. Each step of the way there was consent involved, right? But it was made very clear with these two individuals, representatives in the community, that we had to really honor this relationship, and at any time he could pull out, but that we really need to listen to his story, and then we had to send it back and make sure that he was okay with the content and agreed to it, because it was going to be in a book and also in a digital format. And that he was okay with also the visual depiction of his image and that sort of thing. So I'm very sensitive and aware to this particular this question that is triggered in me. And this is a question from the audience, and that is, how can we help older adults, and specifically older Indigenous adults, to feel safe to tell their stories? And how do we create spaces to hear these stories and learn from each other?
On my mic, and
Okay,
okay, is it on? I'm just not gonna touch it. Awesome, thank you. Yeah, that's a great question, and I appreciate how you outlined like the really thoughtful process of engaging like that. Because even just through conversations with like colleagues and each other, and even time to just brainstorm, personally, I might not want a drawing of myself like in a book that didn't look the way I would like it. So it's like even applying those things to just people in general, and like really valuing like their preferences and input, like very important. And then I think like especially with Indigenous elders, and ooh, what's his name? There's a doctor in an Indigenous doctor in Alberta. I'm gonna get the name, I'll just need a minute, but they really talk about how ceremony was always a part of in like the Indigenous and like Nehiyah Cree ways, and that when you'd go to healthcare, it would be ceremony. When you would go to education, it would be ceremony, and that these things were never separate. So especially applying different lenses of like cultural safety and trying to work with like a trauma-informed approach, if all ways are considered ceremony, then what would that person like to share, what not like to share, and with whom specifically? So yeah, like really good things to like think about. And it just like takes in mind, I feel like there's a way that, and I have to really check myself for those biases myself, but there's this common theme, and maybe not as much in this line of work when you're like when you are like checking your bias with older people. However, it like there's this way to like infantilize people and speak for them and make those decisions and choices, but it really kind of comes in with like that openness of just asking like, I had this idea, what was your approach? Or really building on long-term relationships and understanding, not like I would have hesitations as a researcher to just, you meet an elder and right away, would you mind filling out this consent form? I want to like grab your story really quickly or something like that. It's just like kind of like the way you approach it, and really just being mindful and having those conversations about what would look the best way to approach it, even for me, from my stance of where I come from. How would I approach it to a friend? Okay, how would I like just generally just kind of having different like
absolutely.
perspectives
And
in
the
there.
one thing I'm learning as we work with our knowledge keeper is that everything we're learning applies to everyone. It's just really being respectful. It's not just with certainly it's brought to light how many assumptions that we make as researchers, that speaking of consent, we were well aware through the entire process. At the very last minute, even though we got consent, the individual may choose to withdraw, and it's just like any research, or may choose not to use their real name, because most of our personas did use their real names and agreed to that and wanted to their stories to be authentic in that way. But we realized that that's not always the case, which takes me to a question for Busola, which relates to consent. And I think, my question is, Busola, is, even if an individual, I know you talk about continuously getting consent even after they've provided it or assent, and that I wonder, in a case where a person is unable to communicate and has already, the power of attorney is sitting with someone else, there's delegated decision making. Does consent and assent still apply in that situation?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Lili. That's a great question. It still applies, even though they may have someone who is making decision on their behalf, but it's important that we still notify them that this is what we're doing, the benefits, the implications. And I think sometimes when it comes to the use of GPS, people are not really told about the implications of using that. We know the benefits. It can help locate someone who goes missing quickly. But what about the implications that I've mentioned, the human rights? So it's really important that we are still asking them to say, even though we know you've delegated the power to this person to make decisions on your behalf, are you still okay? And it also involves trying to learn their own preferences as well as the values of the person living with dementia. We know there are situations that a care partner or a family member might say, hey, I know this is what my mom wants. And you ask them and they say something completely different. And the mom doesn't want that. So we've had situations like that. And how, well, based on my own experience working as a registered nurse. So how do you address that? So it's really, I know it's a dilemma, and sometimes there is really no easy answer, no right or wrong answer. But I think the most important thing is bringing in the perspective of people living with dementia. Even if someone is making decisions on their behalf, they still should be able to say, yes, I want this, or no, I don't want this.
Thank you. Thank you. And I know, Violet, thank you for that. I know, Violet, you've just posted the name of the physician, I think you were talking about, James McCocus. And we have additional information there from Agewell office with his Twitter handle if people want to learn more information. As you all know, and I mentioned at the beginning of this today's webinar that we have invited stakeholders, and today we've got Ian joining us representing one of the stakeholders. So I'm just curious, Ian, can you speak to the value of working with researchers on projects like this?
Having done so for about 4 or 5 years now and had time to reflect on it, I can tell you that the most valuable thing is that one sees, when one has some lived experience, an example of something that one has seen in either caregiving or getting older, one sees that evidence can be absorbed by the researchers and brought into the work that they're doing. And sometimes it's not always easy for a person to be able to vocalize exactly what they are feeling or trying to say. In that way, I found it particularly valuable for the Agewell researchers I've worked with, who are very good at distilling what I'm saying or reposing the question so that they can better bring the evidence that I'm offering into their documents. It's also a privilege to work with bright young people. It's very good for a brain which is, shall we say, moving into its third stage, and it keeps that brain active, and it also gives a hope for the future, because when we see the kind of innovations which we see at Agewell conferences, it's very encouraging to think that the traditional view of previous generations, short retirement life, go play some golf, and off you go into the sunset. Well, now we see devices which can help older adults live much more fully, be entertained, be connected, and live into good longevity.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. You, of course, also come into this relationship with your own, years of expertise as a scientist. And I think I am constantly telling my mentees that the work you're doing is for your future self. And I think individuals like you, who I'm aspiring to be like, validate that this is important work for the future generations. So I really appreciate you taking the time to, in the last 4 years, to be involved in this way, but also today for presenting. And we have maybe 1 to 1.5 minutes for each of you to just speak to what you think will be the next steps of your project. So for example, you know, Carlee and Ian, one of you might want to maybe speak on policy, or Busola, I'm sure policy is a big thing in your work, or not, you could speak on anything else. So just whatever comes to mind for you. Maybe we could do the, I could just call out your name if that's okay, or you want to volunteer, that's fine too. Yeah, I'll call out your name. Okay, so why don't we begin with Violet? What do you see as the next step in your work?
Awesome. So the next, I feel there's quite a bit of steps, which can somewhat feel like a bit overwhelming, but kind of just one step at a time type thing. Although my mind kind of goes in two directions. One is to reach more people for information like gathering. And then my next one would be to work towards having the literature review and the policy recommendations gifted where they need to go, kind of thing like that, and where those would be kind of most appropriate.
Wonderful, and I'm so intrigued by your work and look forward to following you and reading about your findings. Busola?
Yeah, sure. So for me, I know someone posed the question if I've had the opportunity to share my findings with technology developers. And I think that will be the next step for me to be able to share the findings and also my recommendations with them, and maybe work with them to see if I can lend my own expertise or from my own experience and share that. And just like you rightly said, Lili, policy is really big for me. And I will also love the opportunity to summarize and share policy recommendations for policymakers. But I think this information has to be really concise, and it has to be, fascinating for them to be able to see. So I look forward to doing that. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. We might have some future politicians in this group too, to make these policies implemented. Carlee.
So for us approaching the final year of our project, there will be increased focus on policy recommendations. And I think they'll be quite comprehensive. We were talking in a team meeting the other day that we see this project as maybe the beginning of a movement to re-envision how we think about continuing care, just as Ian, you described very well, that, it's no longer just off into the sunset, but to supporting people to be active, self-directed people in whatever way that looks for them. And so to do this, I think policy recommendations will be comprehensive, from looking at care planning to what are staff roles involved and funding mechanisms and policies related to IT infrastructure and use of assistive technologies. So there will be many, and I think it'll be comprehensive. But I will also give a disclaimer, Ian, in case you want to add on anything I missed, that this isn't necessarily my expertise. So I can also add our email again to the chat in case people have any other questions.
Yes, I certainly hope that this is the beginning of more conversations, and that the viewers will be, accessing your contact information to continue the dialogue. And Ian, what are the next steps for you?
I think we're moving towards the final collection of data, and it's looking very promising that the data will accurately reflect the increased value of life, quality of life that the participants have been enjoying. That should be a major driver in mobilizing this evidence to the interest of other stakeholders, whether they are not-for-profit institutions, whether they are private institutions, and there are many levels of government, local, provincial, even federal, that could be well interested in hearing this benefit to society.
That's fantastic. Thank you for capping that off with a very important message. I think, Violet, you wanted to jump in? Go ahead. You're on mute, though.
I just wanted to say thank you to both presenters and everyone who came today to watch, and of course our facilitators. And I just wanted to say, like, when we're thinking about autonomy and independence and really like the work we do within this challenge area, how beautiful it is to really come together to support person-centered well-being. And it can be like a catchphrase of saying person-centered, but
Yes.
it really shows, like, I feel in each of your presentations that it was just so value driven, so like thoughtful of what you want to give to research and what you add to your area. And just even the chat, how the chat has supported us, like even with our presentations, just so thankful to, you know, be advocating for like the inequities that are out there. And yeah, I definitely would love a smart device when I'm older for sure. And like just happy to know that these different technologies are being driven and learned about.
Thank you. Thank you for adding that, Violet. I concur with you. I think what's come out of this panel conversation today is you've each breathed such meaningful life into the concepts of autonomy and independence for our older population, but also that you've shed light on how you're led, as you say, Violet, in your words, very well said. You're led by value and by the meaning, and not led by the technology. And the technology is there to support. It's not dictating how we do things. And that other concepts such as accessibility, affordability, hence love the relationship to policy that all of you emphasize in your presentation. I want to also remind, I know it's in the chat, remind folks that AgeWell's Policy Hub, the APPTA, is going to host a research policy workshop as part of the EPIC conference. So you can check out the conference website for registration information, and also to remind people not to forget to register for the other lineup of wonderful EPIC conference sessions, including a network event, expert panels, a workshop, and I believe there are 2, if not more, French language sessions. So happy to see that that's out there. So wonderful. I'm going to give you back 2 minutes of your afternoon. Thank you so much, Busola. Thank you so much, Carlee, Ian, and Violet. It's been wonderful to get to know each of you, and I hope to see you in person in Regina at the AgeWell conference in the fall. Thank you, audience, for your wonderful questions, and have a good afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.